I come from a rather hectic and busy background. Growing up in the Silicon Valley, there's a million and one things happening at any given moment. It's hard sometimes to just sit down and breathe. No matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, or how much you have on your plate, there's always something else being added on, and yet another extra level of superficial expectations to adjust to. It can be suffocating at best, and, well, more often than not, an Atlantean task to just keep your head above the water. Today, I live 1,700 miles away in a rather quiet college town. While the weather can sure be something to get used to, I wouldn't change it for the world. I'd never go back. This place is calm, serene, and, well, in the best possible sense, utterly boring. Nothing ever really happens here. Outside of the university, the city isn't a particularly touristy destination. The townies who live here all year seem generally well adjusted, and the kinds of crime you're likely to hear are generally petty theft and property damage. People being too drunk to decide to not break a window during an argument with a bar owner, or the Walgreens having their over-the-counters go missing or something. We're an hour away from the closest big city, and really 2 hours in any direction from any major metropolitan hubs. The last thing you ever expect to hear in this town? A serial killer stayed here. Some of the most popular and captivating media to consume today surrounds the true crime stories of years past, be it Bundy, Kaczynski, Berkowitz, BTK, Manson, the Zodiac, or any of the other Netflix top crime stories. We, as a society, love the payoff of catching the bad guy, and the satisfaction of catching the killer only increases with how heinous the murders are. It turns an instinctive revulsion of evil into what amounts to be a rather voyeuristic, lustful sense of justice, shifting the story away from the actions to the actors, trying to piece together the kind of person that would choose to commit such heinous acts. In our love for these stories, it can be easy to detach ourselves from the anathemic actions of the killers, focusing rather on how they got caught or what made them the way that they are. We have a terribly difficult time actually sitting and contemplating what has been done, that often we forget the very victims themselves and their families and friends. But when there isn't anything more to see, when there's no one to point the finger at or lay the blame on, what do we do? Almost exactly 30 years ago, a man would leave a trail of 6 bodies across 4 states, and to this day, they have never been caught or even positively identified. From Kansas to Indiana, a single man in April and May of 1992 would leave a trail of death and destruction with no rhyme, no reason, no motive, not a single trace of where he may have gone or where he is today. 6 bodies in 5 cities across 4 states. For all we can confirm, it's possible this man is still walking among us to this day. With no answers and an ever colder trail, the chances of catching the man in question are growing fewer and fewer by the day, while the families of the victims are left to live on without so much as closure. With 2 decades of unanswered questions, this is the unfinished story of the I-70 killer.
Investigators have found out all they can at the scene of Robin Fuldauer's killing. What's missing is the chance to talk to the one person who may have the most information about what really happened. That's because police don't know who that person is. They only know it was the last customer Fuldauer rang up before her killing.
On April 8th of 1992, Robin Fuldauer, 26 years old, was working the register at a Payless shoes source off of Pendleton Pike in Indianapolis. A hard-working young woman, she would often be the only employee in the store. Around 1 p.m., finishing her lunch break, Robin would have come face-to-face with a man witnesses would describe as carrying a large duffel bag who had been circling the building before waiting on the curb for over an hour. No longer than half an hour more, the man was seen walking out of the Payless shoes source, heading towards I-70. Some witnesses claim to have seen him hitchhiking the interstate later that same day. No more than 2 hours after the encounter, the next door gas station employee comes in looking for Robin. The owner of the Payless shoes source had reportedly been trying to reach her. Noticing that the register was open and emptied, the gas station employee immediately went to call the police. Arriving on the scene, law enforcement were the first to discover Robin's body. Investigators noted that the transactions for the day showed that whatever money had been left in the register would have been less than $100, and that the last transaction named the purchase of 2 pairs of tennis shoes, one men's and one women's. Surveilling the building, the investigators failed to find any cameras or security measures other than a door buzzer that alerted employees when a customer entered. While not many witnesses exist, the witnesses that did spot this man would all describe him to look somewhat like this. He's responsible for the deaths of at least 5 individuals, with a potential 3 or 4 others down in Texas. To this day, this man has never been caught, and for all we know, might still be out there. Robin was a graduate of Indiana University and had been working at a Payless shoes source for 3 years, previously being the manager of a Pickaway shoes. Today, she is survived by her parents, Elliot and Carol, as well as her sisters, Lynn and Susan.
Closing up shop for the evening, only the last customer is a killer. 2 women found murdered in a Wichita bridal shop.
Just in the wrong place, in the wrong time. To me, it makes them very true victims.
On April 11th of 1992, Patricia Majors had been working late with her sole employee, Patricia Smith, at La Bride d'Elegance, a bridal shop she had opened with her husband only a year prior. Typically closing at 6, they had been requested by a male customer to stay open until 6:30 as he was running late to pick up a cummerbund. When he arrived, the women were nowhere to be found. He met a man in the store who had requested the customer join him in the back room. Perhaps sensing something was wrong, the customer had declined. Immediately after leaving the shop, they would call law enforcement. Smith, 23 years old, and Majors, 32 years old, would come face to face with their killer moments before their death. Taking them to the back room of the establishment, facing them away from him, and lining them up next to each other, they would be murdered execution style with 2 shots to the back of the head, before the killer would ransack the register and take a few of their belongings, escaping moments before law enforcement would arrive on scene. The women are survived by their husbands, Mark Majors and Norman Smith, along with Patricia Smith's father, Bob Trendle. While Bob and Norman have given up on finding answers, Mark does not believe he will ever find closure. Quote, "There's never going to be any closure for me. Not a day of my life that this hasn't haunted me, and it will until the day I die. I want her back, and I know it'll never happen." Mark would reopen the bridal shop shortly after the murders, but would sell just a few months later. Today, Ascent Computer Technology sits on the site.
A customer entering this ceramics store made the horrible discovery this afternoon. Just inside the front window of Sylvia's Ceramics lay a man's body. 40-year-old Michael McCown, the shop's owner, suffered a single gunshot wound to the head. Vigo County Coroner Dr. Roland Kaur says beyond that, details are sketchy.
I really can't tell. This is not the ideal circumstance to investigate. The wound is in an awkward place, partially covered by hairline, so trying to estimate range of fire is really hard at this time.
Michael McCown, 40 years old, had bought Sylvia's Ceramics in Terre Haute, Indiana, from his mother in 1987 after returning home from traveling the country as a bass player. Located in a strip mall across the street from an auto shop and next to a car rental service, the ceramic shop often saw many customers passing through Terre Haute towards Indianapolis. While his mother still worked at the shop, he would take over the brunt of the business, and occasionally would take some of his mother's shifts. April 27th of 1992 was a rather quiet day in the store. Michael had been stocking shelves most of the morning, not seeing customers until the afternoon. A man walks in asking for Michael to see a white porcelain house on a shelf behind the counter. Turning around, Michael would never feel the shot to the back of his head. At 4:15 p.m., a customer entered the store and discovered Michael's body. Contacting law enforcement immediately, the investigators found that the killer had neglected to open the register, but had similarly removed Michael's wallet before making his escape.
It's at this point, however, that our killer makes his first mistake. The I-70 killer, up until this point, has killed 3 women, all within their 20s to 30s. This suggests a pattern now broken. Up until this point, and every murder after, the I-70 killer only killed women in their 20s and 30s with dark brown hair. While he certainly did not fit the victim profile of the I-70 killer, Michael had a penchant for sporting his long brown hair in a ponytail and wearing an earring.
His family members remember Michael as having recently cut his hair short and had said nothing of earrings. With his parents having passed in 2012 and 2019, no answers have yet been found.
Nancy was a very good person. She didn't deserve this.
Don and Carol Kitzmiller had been waiting 29 years to learn who killed their daughter.
Nancy was what you want your kids to be. She was sweet. She was caring and giving.
If you walked in her store and you didn't know her, you were her friend when you left.
Nancy Kitzmiller was perhaps the most Midwestern gal you could ever meet. An equestrian for most of her life, her friends were all cowboys and cowgirls, and she adored the rodeo and horse shows. A straight-laced young woman, she never did drugs, she never smoked, she rarely caused any trouble, and almost never drank. A recent graduate from Oklahoma State University, she was about to begin working for the Defense Mapping Agency in St. Louis within the next few months. A kind and accommodating woman, Nancy would cover her coworkers' shifts at Boot Village in Bogey Hills Plaza, opening late on May 3, 1992. A rather busy workday, she came in contact with a man described as being of average height with dull reddish-brown hair at around 2:30. No more than 15 minutes later, customers would find her body in the back room, face down, with a gunshot wound to the back of the head. With a small amount of money missing from the register, the man was nowhere to be found.
We've had all this hope over the years, and so I don't know what this is going to bring.
It doesn't change anything, does it? It's all said and done.
While the case remains open, there is little hope for such an old case. If nothing else, Kitzmiller's hope for closure. Nancy is survived by her parents and her sister.
The final senseless killing took place 3 days later on May 7th. In Raytown, Missouri, 37-year-old Sarah Blessing was shot while working alone at the Shop of Many Colors.
A Topeka native, Sarah Blessing had been a scholastic star in both her adolescence and early adulthood. Graduating from Washburn University with a 3.90 GPA, Her Bachelor's of Arts in Interpersonal Communications and a minor in psychology were simply the beginning of her academic achievement. Holding her place on the Dean's and President's honor rolls, awarded the honorary Pan-Hellenic and Speech scholarships, and acquiring a responderie, the equivalent of a bachelor's, from the School of Metaphysics. With her husband, she would move around the country, establishing schools from Detroit to Chicago to Oklahoma City, Tulsa, and finally Dallas, before returning to Kansas City. Shifting her focus to health foods and natural healing, she became a distributor for Nature's Sunshine vitamins and supplements. Eventually opening her own store called Nature's Blessing, she concentrated on holistic lifestyles, reflexology, herbology, and fasting. Close to closing, on May 7, 1992, Sarah encountered a man with dark reddish-brown hair who had loitered in front of the shop for some time before coming in and asking about various products. Around 6:15, Tim Hickman, the owner of the video store next door, heard a loud, sharp popping sound through the brick wall that separated the two stores. He spotted the loitering man from before, rounding the corner of the building and heading towards I-70. Rather than give chase, Hickman went to check on Sarah, where he found her in the back room of her store, face down with a gunshot wound to the back of the head. Law enforcement would arrive on scene minutes later, and Hickman's eyewitness description would match up with each previous witness, as well as two further who had reportedly seen the same man hitchhiking on I-70 later that day. Investigators would link the 6 murders through eyewitness testimony, ballistics reports, similar MOs, and the interstates. Today, the trail's temperature might as well be absolute zero. While there are several similar incidents that coincided with the murders of Marianne Glasscock and Amy Vess in Texas along I-35, local officials are reluctant to tie the two sets of investigations together due to several differences in MO. Even with the trail this cold, the case does remain open, and the investigators remain hopeful that their efforts are not in vain. To begin, let's discuss the largest and most complex piece of the puzzle that ties all of these together. Specifically, the ballistics report. The ballistics report states that the most likely firearm used by the killer would have been an Irma-Werk ET-22 handgun. Even then, they cannot entirely rule out the Intratec Scorpion, as both have rather similar fire patterns. Chambered in .22 long rifle, these semi-automatic firearms, while unique in appearance, operate with the most ubiquitously popular and some of the cheapest ammunition on the market. Analysis of the casings indicate that the ammunition brand was Cascade Cartridge Incorporated, or CCI. Residue analyzed on these casings suggests that whoever the killer is potentially a very skilled machinist taking great care of their firearm. The residue included chemical traces of corundum and rouge. Together, these compounds are used in a process called fire lapping, where cartridges of this compound are fired through the barrel for rather convenient cleaning, as well as to modify or refine the barrel's rifling. As for the firearm itself, the Irma-Werk ET-22 was developed after Luger shut down post-World War II, in an effort to kill a weapon so ubiquitous with an army that had committed such atrocities. In response, Berthold Giepel, founder of Irma-Werk and the creator of the STG-44 Sturmgewehr, as well as the MP-38 submachine gun, decided to manufacture a replica of an earlier Imperial Navy model Luger used throughout World War I. Compared to its inspiration, the Luger P-04, the ET-22's largest difference is quite easily its barrel length, being twice that of the P-04, and its polished wood forestock, sometimes called a carbine. But what do we know besides the ballistics report? If we look at the evidence and surroundings themselves, we begin to pick up on a few patterns that lend credence towards a particular type of killer. First, and most obviously, The killer targeted brunette female store clerks and shop owners in their 20s and 30s of average height specifically. While this pattern is clear, there is, of course, one major flaw: Michael McCown. Michael was a male, about 6 foot 2 inches tall, and in his 40s. That's 3 strikes against the pattern already. But before we disregard him, let's look at Michael. That fateful day had been the only day that week that Michael had taken a shift that was always his mother's shift. His mother, though not in the age range of other victims, had been a brunette of average height, a store clerk, and the former owner of the business before selling it to her son. Given the rather careful nature of the killer's actions and how he chooses his timing wisely, it's likely he could have been casing the building the previous day and had seen Michael's mother in the shop, believing her to likely be there rather than her son. Upon finding that his plan had been changed, rather than give up, he chose to push forward regardless and murder Michael anyway. According to various witnesses and investigators, Michael may have let his hair grow out, putting it into a ponytail, and possibly having been wearing an earring at the time. This does have the potential to be another explanation as to why the killer would have chosen to stick with killing Michael. Perhaps he mistook Michael for a woman. But his family distinctly mentions that he had recently had a haircut, and never do they mention the earring's existence. The question is, would it be more out of character for the investigators or the family to misidentify Michael's attributes? It's rather hard to say, and it's even harder to argue that either would willingly make such a mistake. As to the killer's mode of transport, there are several witnesses in at least 2 different killings that claim to have spotted the killer hitchhiking their way across the interstate. But investigators believe it is also possible that he could have been employed as some sort of traveling salesman, or a for-hire contractor, or even a long-haul trucker. If that is the case, he would have needed to store his vehicle somewhere that it wouldn't have been seen, or the witnesses may have ID'd the vehicle and traced it back to the killer. During my long trip on I-70, I saw each and every single location of the 6 murders and noticed a series of patterns. First, every single location was within spitting distance of a residential neighborhood. In fact, most of the addresses were directly across the street from some sort of cul-de-sac. Given that, it could be rather simple to hide a vehicle, walk across the street, case the scene, and wait for the opportune moment. Afterwards, he could head to the interstate, hitchhike to the nearest gas station, and hitchhike back separately to retrieve the vehicle for his transport. He could pay the unsuspecting Samaritans who transported him with money he took from the registers and could have kept going. Another interesting observation: every single crime scene was within a crosswalk of an auto shop. Is it possible that he could have stored his vehicle there, having them service his car in some way, maybe fill the tires, check the fluids, whatever it is, anything? He would have only needed time to scout the site earlier, but again, that's not too difficult. Moments after the murder, he could have picked the vehicle up and left. Now, I would have to argue that his hitchhiking would make less sense if he left his vehicle at the auto shop, but I believe it's still plausible. He would have needed to take the time to scout each building, look for security measures and best points of ingress and egress, especially for the rather busy murder of Kitzmiller. He was also a particularly opportunistic killer, biding his time for the best window of opportunity before acting. Now, this was also a rather deliberate set of victims with a particular intent to kill. Every single victim was a shopkeeper or shop owner. Every single case but one included brunette females in their 20s and 30s of average height, and there was never anything sexual about the crime itself, only taking the victim's belongings. The terrible truth is that we know absolutely nothing about the man, other than that he is a man and he did commit these murders, and that he had his own motives for doing so, whatever they were. Like a ghost ship, he arrives, he scares every sane person, and disappears into the night, never to be seen since. The law enforcement involved in the ongoing investigation have released an updated rendering of what he might look like today, given what we know of him at the time. There's not much more to go off of than that, but we have to try what we can. For anyone with information of the I-70 killer that could lead to the identification or arrest of the man, there's a $25,000 prize available for you to claim. More than that, there's the gratitude of the families and friends of at least 6 individuals that wouldn't have closure otherwise. For their sake, please do what you can. For my part, I hope this video can help put the I-70 killer back underneath the microscope. While I may not be the world's greatest detective, crowdsourced crime solving is an important, emerging community that desperately needs all of the help that it can get. To the families and the loved ones of the victims of these heinous crimes, I want you all to know that I wish I could do more to help solve these murders and bring closure to all who desperately deserve even a semblance of peace. To the rest of you watching this, thank you for your time. You know what you need to do. Help in any way you can.